July 15th, Gauri Das Pandit Das Prabhu leaves Vrindavan. The Indian government refused to renew his visa a second time. Actually, in this chronological timeline segment, we have mentioned Gauri Das Pandit Prabhu a number of times. We have said a little bit about who he is and what his services were in relation to this issue. But I felt it was needed to explain a little bit more so that everyone can appreciate why his input on this issue is important and that his input should be given the respect it deserves. Now, originally I was going to make this as a sidebar and make it an optional that one could click on it. Now I'm just going to put it in as part of this July 15th, timeline, because it is important to understand how his views on this should be given proper respect. So it's just going to be part of the presentation. Who is Gauri Das Pandit Das Prabhu? In this chronological timeline segment, I will refer to His Grace Gauri Das Pandit Das Prabhu a number of times. So who is he and why is his input on this issue pertinent and important? I don't know him personally, and I may get a few details wrong, and if so, he will be the first to correct me. But here's what I know. At least I think I know of him. I don't know when he started to serve Tamal Krishna, but at least during this time from mid-May, at least that's obvious, from mid-May to mid-July of 1977, Gauri Das Pandit was serving as Tamal Krishna Maharaja's brahmachari assistant. As such, he traveled with Tamal. Since Tamal Krishna was at that time acting as Srila Prabhupada's personal secretary and was traveling with Srila Prabhupada, Gauri Das Pandit joined Tamal and also became a member of Srila Prabhupada's traveling entourage at the time. Srila Prabhupada's health was slowly deteriorating for a number of months prior to May. And as he became more and more bedridden and weak, he required more than one personal servant, than what one personal servant could render. While His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj was serving as Srila Prabhupada's personal secretary, which means he was assisting Srila Prabhupada with secretarial services, such as assisting with his correspondence, excuse me, arranging his schedules, appointments, meetings, travel arrangements, etc., assisting with Srila Prabhupada as he continued to help manage the ISKCON mission. Srila Prabhupada also had personal servants who helped him with his personal needs, such as cooking, washing his clothing, his bedding, giving him massages, shaving, etc. Again, as Srila Prabhupada's health worsened, his personal needs increased, and the need for more than one personal servant increased. So I assume that Tamal Krishna must have suggested Gauri Das Pandit could also become one of Srila Prabhupada's personal servants. And so he was trained for that and began also serving Srila Prabhupada in that capacity as Prabhupada's personal servant, while at the same time, he was still serving Tamal Krishna as his assistant also. It is my understanding that Srila Prabhupada had expressed his sincere appreciation for Gauri Das Pandit's service as his personal servant. It appears that Srila Prabhupada liked Gauri Das Pandit Prabhu's association, his personal association, and he appreciated his service the services that he rendered as well. Why I feel it's important to understand these things is because there have been GBC members and senior devotees who have tried to disparage his character and the integrity of his accounts of what he says he personally witnessed and heard Srila Prabhupada say in regards to this issue. Gauri Das's account of what he says took place has been dismissed by a number of GBC members, and they have given him absolutely no credibility at all. The main reason for this is that his accounts are at total odds with what the GBC have thought were what Srila Prabhupada actually said or wanted. I recall reading one article by a senior sannyasi who wrote about Gauri Das condescendingly, referring to him as just a junior devotee who never held a managerial position, and therefore for those reasons they argue that no one should take his accounts with any seriousness or credibility at all. I find this most sad way to treat their own sincere godbrother, and I wanted to explain why his position is a good argument to why his accounts of what took place deserves our attention and significant consideration. First of all, while some of the senior sannyasis and GBC men may look down on Gauri Das as just a mere junior devotee who held no managerial office, I look upon him as one who is one of the very few souls who had the glorious and wonderful services of actually directly and personally serving His divine grace. That to me is a very rare and super excellent service and position to hold. I've also observed that many of those who are drawn to big managerial positions often possess a more aggressive character, while those devotees who happily take up a surrendered and submissive position, who are not only just serving Srila Prabhupada, and he was serving directly and personally, but who also have the humility to submissively render service and assist one of their own godbrothers. Generally, those devotees have honorable, sincere, and trustworthy personal traits. It was Tamal Krishna who authored the book Servant of the Servant regarding his own service to Srila Prabhupada, and Gauridas Pandit happily and submissively served as Tamal's servant, making him the servant of the servant of the servant. As we know, the real Vaishnava takes the mood and actual position as Das Das Anudas. And this was Gauridas Pandit's actual position and service. The other reason I find his accounts to be most likely reliable is that he would have had and has had absolutely nothing at all to gain to just make up such accounts or stand fast to his claims when those accounts go against what the GBC are saying what happened. So he has nothing to gain for this. From day one, he was bringing up these claims and his account as to what had taken place, and this has pitted him against the GBC. He has had absolutely nothing to gain by voicing his accounts or having stood by them for all these years. He has always remained a devotee of Krishna, a sincere follower of Srila Prabhupada. His only desire has been to remain a member of ISKCON in good standing. So it makes absolutely no sense for him to either make up such an account or to have held on to the validity of his account of what took place all these years if he wasn't really certain that he knew exactly what Srila Prabhupada was saying. At least in essence, you would think, he would have backed off, as he could see this was pitting him against the GBC if he wasn't absolutely certain that this is what his accounts were correct about what he heard Srila Prabhupada say. And he has remained as adamant today as he has been for the last 4 decades that his accounts are accurate as much as humanly possible. And one of the things he has insisted on is that before the May 28th meeting, around the May 23rd, that Srila Prabhupada had discussed a Ritvik Acharya system with Tamal Krishna and had told him that he was planning on putting that into place for after he leaves, where they would initiate on his behalf, perform the ceremonies on his behalf, and he would remain the actual initiating guru. And again, he was in the meetings, he attended the meetings along with Tamal when Srila Prabhupada was speaking and dictating what he wanted for the July 9th letter, the Ritvik appointment directive. And that again, in those meetings, he claims that that system that that was written down in the July 9th letter, that Prabhupada had given that system clearly and explicitly given instructions that that was the system to be followed for after he departs. Obviously, if Gauridas, and by the way, about that meeting before the May 28th meeting, the GBC had more or less denied his account of that. As I've shown, all the evidence, the way the GBC asked those questions, the nature of the questions, Prabhupada's response to the question, their response to Prabhupada's response, just all of it just points to the fact that Srila Prabhupada had discussed this with at least Tamal prior to the May 28th meeting. So in that way, he's been vindicated on that because all the evidence points to that. Obviously, Gauridas Pandit's accounts are accurate. It would totally destroy the GBC's arguments and be proof as that this is the system that Srila Prabhupada actually wanted, that's outlined in the July 9th letter. Therefore, the GBC have remained convinced that Gauridas's account has to be incorrect. And his accounts just have to be incorrect. And so they don't even want to think about it. And they'll belittle his position just to make it appear that it has to be correct. However, aside from Srila Prabhupada, the only other devotee in these two meetings, besides Gauri Das Pandit, was Tamal Krishna Maharaj. So why would Tamal Krishna hold a different account of what took place than Gauri Das? And that is a very good question. So let's look at the two timelines separately. First, Gauri Das has claimed that on or about May 23rd, some days before the May 28th meeting, that Srila Prabhupada spoke of appointing some men to act as what he at that time called Ritvikacharyas, who would perform the initiation ceremonies on his behalf after he departs. While I have not seen the GBC ever officially acknowledge this, the very nature of the two questions they asked in that May 28th meeting very, and I emphasize very, much substantiate this as a fact. Otherwise, the questions they chose to ask and the conversation itself make no real sense at all. So, and significantly, at least one time, Tamal Krishna himself, who was the only other devotee in those meetings, has admitted that Srila Prabhupada did speak about Ritvikacharyas before the May 28th meeting. He discussed it with the GBC, and that's why they wound up asking those two questions. As I pointed out, all of the evidence points to this being an undeniable fact. However, Gauri Das Pandit, since he was not a member of the GBC, he didn't attend either the meeting with, he didn't attend the May 28th meeting, and nor did he attend any other later meetings or any other meetings of the GBC, where the GBC members discussed amongst themselves and what they thought Prabhupada was saying on the May 28th meeting. So not being a GBC, he was not in any of those meetings. As I have documented, an official GBC report of that meeting was written, and it was signed by 18 members of the GBC who understood that that report faithfully conveyed Srila Prabhupada's answer to their questions as to how initiations were to be conducted after he departs. And as I've documented, that report was completely misleading, flawed. It was just wrong. It was just outright totally wrong. It was lacking. It didn't convey at all what Srila Prabhupada had actually said. And yet, Tamal Krishna and Satsvarup Prabhus came out of that meeting 100% convinced that Srila Prabhupada had said he would soon select some men who would become regular gurus and initiate their own disciples. The official GBC report was written and submitted to the full GBC stating this, and this was the only official record the GBC had to go on for many years as to what they had thought Srila Prabhupada had instructed regarding initiations after he departs. So even though just a few days earlier, Srila Prabhupada had discussed a Ritvik Acharya system with Tamal, where he, and so Tamal was convinced then, before the May 28th meeting, that this is what Srila Prabhupada wanted, a Ritvik system. During that May 28th meeting, they got confused. Tamal and Satsvarup got confused. Prabhupada was talking about Ritviks, and then he talked about on my order become guru, a separate, and they thought he was talking about one and the same, and they got confused, they got written down wrong. So coming out of that meeting, Tamal was 100% confident that he must have misunderstood Prabhupada before, or that maybe Prabhupada changed his mind, or that he probably just misunderstood. And so he thought now Prabhupada wants whoever he's going to name will be regular gurus. So Gauri Das Pandit wasn't in those GBC meetings, and neither did he. Was he given a copy of that the GBC official record of those meetings, because he wasn't a GBC member. So he had no idea what conclusion the GBC had reached. And Gauri Das Pandit only had his own memory of what he knew Srila Prabhupada had said before the May 28th meeting. And he wasn't influenced by that totally false and misleading official GBC report. But Tamal Krishna and the rest of the GBC were. So even though Tamal Krishna didn't himself sign the official GBC record, as I've pointed out, most likely he may have been just too busy assisting Srila Prabhupada, but according to Jayadvaita's account, as confirmed by Satsvarup Prabhu. Satsvarup had approached Tamal after the May 28th meeting with concerns about their conclusion and suggested that they go back to Srila Prabhupada and ask him to confirm in writing that the men he would soon name would be actual gurus. And Tamal's response was that he was certain that this was what Srila Prabhupada had said, and that was good enough for him. It would have to be good enough for everybody else, and he refused. But this proves that he upheld, even though he didn't sign the GBC report, that he upheld that report as being accurate. Now, fast forward to July 7th, or July 7th, the 9th, and as Srila Prabhupada now selects the first of the 11 Ritvik representatives, and he is fully documenting the process for those initiations, where he states that he will remain the actual initiator guru. The only other person in those meetings was, again, Gauridas Pandit Das. And according to Gauridas Pandit, Srila Prabhupada had clearly stated that that Ritvik representative of the Acharya system that he was giving in this letter was for now and for after he departs. And the evidence that I've shown confirms that this was also Tamal's original understanding of that letter as well. On the first few days as he came out of the meeting and had the signed letter, he talked to Jasodananda and he told him this was the system for after Prabhupada departs. Less than a week later, on July 15th, Gauridas has to leave India because the government refused to renew his visa for a second time. When he leaves India, he takes with him his clear memory of those two time frames. When Srila Prabhupada had originally discussed the Ritvik system as being the system that he wants for after he departs, which was on or around May 23rd, before the May 28th meeting. And now the July 7th to 9th, as Srila Prabhupada has been dictating and perfecting his July 9th Ritvik appointment directive. So Gauridas Pandit left India, and his clear understanding was that this was the system that Srila Prabhupada had been talking about it 5.5 weeks earlier, and then now again. And so this is all he knew because he wasn't influenced by the totally flawed and completely wrong GBC report, that May 28th report. So when he leaves India, he leaves with this understanding. And it was Tamal Krishna's also, when they came out of the room on May 23rd, that was Tamal's understanding. The Prabhupada's going to set up a Ritvik system for after he departs. And then 5.5 weeks later, as they make this letter, Tamal comes out of that meeting understanding this. And that was also Gauridas Pandit's understanding from both meetings, except that he wasn't influenced by that misleading May 28th official GBC record. All right, so that July 9th letter, after it was signed, it was mailed off to Rameshwar. All right, I'm going to go off script a little bit again. The reason I'm doing this once in a while and going off script because I want to just get this done. And right now I'm doing my videos. So if I sit down and retype the script and redo it and then come back to the video, no, I just want to get the video done. So after the letter was signed, it was mailed off to Rameshwar. And for Rameshwar to make copies and mail them out. But before he mailed it out to the temple presidents, I will put this into the timeline, 1 or 2 timelines coming up. I will go through this, so I'm not going to give all the details. But when Tamal came out of the meeting with that letter during the meeting, and now he came out with the letter, he was convinced that this was the system Prabhupada actually wanted for after he departs. Somewhere along the line, after the letter reached Rameshwar and is just about to be mailed out to temple presidents, Rameshwar, Tamal, somebody realized, hey, that we have a problem here because remember the GBC official report. It says Prabhupada will give names, select some men, and they will be regular gurus. That's not stated here in this letter. So I'll get to that in the coming up time frames. But obviously, either It was Tamal, and he became convinced he must have misunderstood these as he was dictating this letter, what Prabhupada really wanted, or other GBC members convinced him he must have misunderstood the July 9th letter as he was dictating it, taking the dictation and writing it. Because then Tamal changed his mind on this and accepted what the rest of GBC accepted was that this July 9th letter was not for afterwards. It was just now during, while Prabhupada is still present, after they will become regular gurus. So we'll get to more of that in the next couple timelines. So let me just refresh what I was saying, that there are only two devotees who sat in on the May 23rd meeting with Srila Prabhupada and the meetings that led to the writing of the July 9th letter. There were only two devotees who sat in both of those meetings, and that was Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Gauri Das Pandit Prabhu. Of the two, only Gauri Das Pandit remained totally uninfluenced by the totally flawed and wrong and completely misleading May 28th GBC report. The evidence proves that Tamal accepted that flawed and misleading report. And of course, the evidence proves that that report is so misleading and flawed. And yet, Gauri Das Pandit wasn't influenced by that. He only sat in on the two meetings. He was a brahmachari. He was a brahmachari at the time. His memory was sharp. He was assisting Tamal Krishna as his personal assistant. So he wasn't envious of anyone. He was serving Srila Prabhupada as his personal servant. And he was just in these meetings, and this is what he remembers. And he's not influenced by any of the things, the flawed report and the totally wrong report that the GBC was influenced by. And that is why, he left India with this clear memory and clear understanding of what Srila Prabhupada wanted. He wanted this Ritvik representative system. Now, again, fast forward 9 months later to March of 1978, when the GBC roll out the 11 new acharyas and inform everyone that Srila Prabhupada had selected those 11 men to become actual gurus after his disappearance. Gauridas is stunned and shocked, as he knew perfectly well that was not the system that Srila Prabhupada had instructed, that he wanted. So he wrote a letter to Satsvarup to try and explain this and ask what's going on, and Satsvarup simply rejected his account and stood firmly by the GBC's understanding, or misunderstanding, and the GBC have continued to reject his account ever since. And for the reasons I just outlined, Tamal, on the other hand, he accepted that flawed report. He is one of the GBC members who became confused during that May 28th meeting, and he misunderstood what Srila Prabhupada was talking about. He didn't understand Prabhupada's talking about two separate entities. Those who he will recommend to become the Ritvik representatives, and they will, officiating Ritviks who will initiate on his behalf, perform the ceremonies on his behalf for after he departs. And at some point, he will someday give his order for someone to become an actual guru. Those are two separate. Tamal and Satsvarup just got it wrong and thought he was talking about the one and the same, and they got confused. So Tamal was confused by that. A GBC report was written either by him or by a Satsvarup, which Tamal stood by and said that was accurate. And it wasn't. And that influenced the rest of the GBC. So when Tamal walks out of the July 9th meeting with this letter, he's convinced this is now what Prabhupada wants, but the rest of the GBC convince him he's wrong about that meeting, about that letter, because they take the GBC report and say, look, this is what Prabhupada wanted, not this. This is what he said. He's going to select men who will be actual gurus. And so these Ritviks, that's only for while Prabhupada's present. And Tamal accepted, because he thought, yeah, I've already accepted that report before, so yeah, I must have gotten it wrong. Who knows what went through his head? But the only person who wasn't influenced by that was His Grace Gauri Das Pandit Prabhu. And that is why I say that his account on this issue is vitally important to assess any honest and correct understanding of this issue. He was the only devotee present on both occasions when Srila Prabhupada was discussing this issue who was not totally misled by a totally flawed and wrong GBC report. So his account, when he says that Srila Prabhupada had wanted, in both time frames, that he had wanted this Ritvik system to continue after his disappearance, it should be given proper respect and consideration. And Gauri Das himself should be given proper respect that he deserves, rather than simply condescendingly, oh, he was just a junior devotee with no managerial duties. I mean, aren't there any honest and sincere members of the GBC who are willing to stand up and demand that the rest of the GBC do the right thing?